In 1844, the Democrats were split. The three nominees for the presidential candidate were Martin Van Buren, a former president and an abolitionist, James Buchanan, a moderate, Louis Cass, a general and expansionist. From Nashville came a dark horse riding up. He was James K. Polk, Napoleon of the Sun. Austere, severe, he held few people dear. His oratory filled his foes with fear. The factions soon agreed, he's just the man we need to bring about victory, fulfill our manifest destiny, and annex the land the Mexicans command. And when the vote was cast, the winner was Mr. James K. Polk, Napoleon of the Sun.
All right, Mr. Beamer here, A-Push Scholars. We're going to finish up Chapter 18 and talk about Manifest Destiny and its legacy, 1841 to 1848. Talk about, honestly, one of my favorite presidents, perhaps, James K. Polk in the Mexican War. We want to thank the group They Might Be Giants from the late 80s, early 90s with the song James K. Polk. It's definitely a classic to a few people. And here are the key topics. Manifest Destiny, a big topic in the election of 1844 of Polk. His presidency, what he did, and also the Mexican War. These are some important topics in A-Push. First section is a mandate with a question mark for Manifest Destiny. So did James K. Polk have a mandate, which means public support to get Manifest Destiny? And he did. And so let's talk about the election of 1844 between Henry Clay, three-time presidential candidate, three-time loser. But he did a lot for our country as well in terms of internal improvements. And he was a Whig. Okay, and I think Henry Clay, you picked the wrong election year to run. You probably would have won in 1840. That was William Henry Harrison. But 1844, you're going against a special candidate, an unknown, a Democrat, James K. Polk. He was the unknown from Tennessee. His nickname was Young Hickory. And he was endorsed by Andrew Jackson. And so just like Jackson, Polk was from Tennessee. They called him Young Hickory. And him, Polk, and the Democrats advocated Manifest Destiny. We talked about that before. That is the American belief to expand from sea to shining sea, to go across North America and make all that land for the United States. And so he was a big expansionist president. I'd maybe write that down. So he wins the election. Clay was not very specific on certain issues, and he becomes our first dark horse president. Dark horse means a surprise, a person that comes out of nowhere. Nobody saw it coming. James K. Polk does win. Is there anybody in here right now, anybody in my class who maybe, you know what, maybe I do okay on my test, but Beamer, darn it, I think I'm the dark horse. I'm the dark horse for the 5. I'm getting a 5, Beamer. My name's going on your wall. Fire up. All right, there they are, the two main candidates, Henry Clay and James K. Polk. There they are, and James K. Polk wins. This could have been the shortest slide I've ever created. Hurry up then, move on, Beamer. All right, next section, Polk, the purposeful, more alliteration from our author Kennedy. All right, he had a 4-point plan, and darn it, he achieved all 4 points. Very few presidents achieve any of their points or their plans, but Polk was probably the most successful president in doing this. So what did he want? You need to know all 4. He wanted to lower the tariff. Okay, this is a Democratic idea. That's something to keep in mind. Republicans, which we'll get to in the 1850s, were for higher tariffs. Democrats were for lower tariffs. The Whigs also were for higher tariffs as well. He also wanted to restore the independent treasury under Van Buren. So we know that John Tyler did close the independent treasury. That's something the Whigs wanted to do. And they wanted to have the bus, but that never came back. He also wanted to annex Oregon and Texas. Check, that happens. And he wanted to get California, and we got California. So we're going to talk a little bit about the British proposal for Oregon. So from previous in the chapter, we know that there was definitely a dispute over Oregon between Great Britain and the United States. Well, the British proposed a treaty for Oregon that divided at the 49th line of parallel, the line of latitude. some angry Americans were unhappy, like, no way, we want all of Oregon, 5440 or fight becomes your slogan. Let's say it again, 5440 or fight. This becomes the slogan of the Americans, the expansionists that wanted to go all the way up further into Canada. 5440, we'll see on the map on the next slide, is a lot further north. And many of these people actually were northerners, okay, especially some abolitionists. Okay, they wanted more land for the northerners, but the southerners were against it. Okay, so many southerners were against the idea of going all the way up there because that would be more land that would probably not have slavery. And in the end, I would highlight this, the agreement over Oregon. We do divide Oregon at the 49th parallel, which is what it is today. All right, so this map looks at a little bit of territorial expansion here, and so here are a couple of parallels we need to look at. We have the 5440 parallel way up here into Canada, and here's the agreed parallel, the 49th parallel. This is what our border is today with Canada to the north. And so the United States gets this after 1846. I would also highlight the year 1846. This is when we acquire, we end the dispute over Oregon is in 1846. United States gets this. This becomes part of Canada. And a couple other things to look at. Mexico does control this region down here, not for long. And this over here, this region is Louisiana Purchase territory, which will become very important as we get into the 1850s. All right, the rest of the chapter is about the Mexican War. Okay, and so this next section is misunderstandings with Mexico. So it looks like we're going to be getting into some causes, a little causation of the Mexican War. So Polk wanted California. Highlight this. This is a must-know. I mean, this is probably his biggest goal that he wanted was to annex California. The problem is it was still part of Mexico, so that's an issue. A little bit of background of the Mexican War. Mexico actually owed some Americans in their country $3 million, so he wanted to get that money back from the Mexicans. Texas also claimed its southern boundary to be the Rio Grande River. Well, the Mexicans disagreed. They thought it was supposed to be the Nueces River. Okay, and so here's the conflict right here. The disputed area is this region right here. So Texas wanted the Rio Grande down here to be its southern border. Mexico thought it should be the Nueces River right here. So there's conflict right there over this land. So we're generating conflict here. And so the United States actually sent a representative down to Mexico to buy California from them, and Mexico refused to buy it. Big mistake. Polk was actually willing to buy California for $25 million, but the Mexicans would not even listen to the offer. Okay, now we're going to talk about some American blood on American soil. There's a question mark here, so we don't know for sure where exactly we had some American blood, and so blood can't be a good thing. So anyway, well, it's good if you get blood. All right, moving on. All right, so Polk now is in a showdown with the Mexican government. Okay, so there's conflict over the region, the disputed area down by the Rio Grande River. They owe us $3 million. They're not going to not let us buy California. So Polk starts to become the big instigator. Polk is going to instigate really a war with Mexico. He's going to send 4,000 American troops under General Zachary Taylor, future president, by the way, to the disputed area. And basically he's looking to pick a fight with the Mexicans because the Mexican troops are there. And as you might guess, there is conflict and there's some killing going on in the disputed area. And so 16 Americans were killed or wounded by Mexican troops. The Mexican troops did cross the Rio Grande River into the disputed area and did kill some Americans. There was a little bit of conflict in America. Some Americans wanted more information before we go off and declare war. And a Whig congressman introduced something called the Spot Resolution. I would highlight this. And basically, it was a resolution in Congress asking specifically where the American blood was shed. And this gangly Whig congressman, we finally get to him. There he is in all of his splendor. Abraham Lincoln was just like, hey, let's not declare war just yet. Let's figure out exactly where the fighting happened. Did we provoke the fighting? So in the end, the Spot resolutions really did not amount to much. It was a good gesture by Lincoln, but in the end, America was ready for war because we felt the Mexicans crossed into American territory. When Americans died, we want revenge. So boys and girls, welcome to the Mexican War. All right, so this is not a specific section in the book. It's just an overview. I think it's an important page just to cover the basics of this Mexican War. So it was basically 2 to 3 years, 1846 to 1848 between the United States and Mexico. And so Polk pushes for a declaration of war because of the attack by the Mexicans across the Rio Grande. Congress says absolutely, and the vote wasn't even close. 40-2 in the Senate, 174-14 in the House. It was an overwhelming support for the Mexican War, support for James K. Polk. There was a little bit of opposition, but not much because, again, there are not a whole lot of people that were against it. But the Whigs, again, they had a little bit of political policy here, but they were against Polk and the Democrats' policies. So, why does he do it? The bottom line, the must know, is he wants California. And when we get California, we are going to be able to complete, say it with me, manifest destiny, fire up. Okay, the mastering of Mexico. This is about the actual tactics of the Mexican War. And again, there's very little military history in APUSH, so I will be relatively brief. The map on page 392 does show you some of the major generals involved in where we attacked Mexico. All right, so Polk, this is what he wanted. He wanted, once the war to start, he wanted America to quickly beat up Mexico, and he basically hoped that California would be given to the United States with not a lot of bloodshed. Okay, that was his hope, that it would be a quick war. However, it lasted at least 2 years. Some of the key generals, Zachary Taylor, Stephen Kearny, Winfield Scott, all had successes against Mexico. So this was a very, very successful war for the United States. Okay, the United States did very well, and a couple of these people become relatively famous in terms of politics. We'll get to them a little bit later. Also, John C. Fremont does lead Americans in California, so we drive out the Mexicans out of California. And temporarily, for a year or two, California is actually their own separate country called the Bear Flag Revolution, or the Bear Flag Republic, until California becomes a part of the United States in 1850. Okay, fighting Mexico for peace. And again, Polk wanted this war to get over quickly because he wanted California into complete manifest destiny. All right, so while the war was going on, Polk sent representatives to negotiate an armistice or a ceasefire. And so by 1848, it eventually does happen. And one of the best treaties ever, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, ended the war. This is a kind of famous treaty in APUSH. For whatever reason, students find it very fascinating. Maybe it's a name, I don't know. So let's talk about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So what happens? What's the result of the Mexican War? Well, number one, Mexico is forced to cede California and New Mexico to the United States. So we get this large region added to America. Polk is happy. Number two, the United States does recognize the Rio Grande as the border between Texas and Mexico in return for $15 million. So we did have to pay some money in order to get the Rio Grande as our border, and also for the land that we got, California and New Mexico area. The United States also paid the $3 million, $3.25 million, that was actually owed to Americans by the Mexican government. So essentially, the United States paid $18.25 million for Mexico in order to get California, New Mexico region, in Texas for sure. It was probably a pretty good deal. The final treaty is a pretty convincing treaty ratified by the Senate, and so the treaty does prove to be a success for the United States. And we decided to pay for the land partially because we offered Mexico money before the war for California. We actually paid them. We were going to pay them up to $25 million, so we kind of felt bad about taking all this land. So we did give them $18.25 million to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. Okay, the final section is talk about the gains and losses in Mexico. So it was a very successful war for the United States. Okay, we only lost 13,000 soldiers, which is not a very large amount compared to other wars, especially, and actually most of them were from diseases, not from combat. Many U.S. officers would gain valuable experience during the Mexican War, and these military leaders eventually will lead the United States in the Civil War, and also, unfortunately, would be leaders in the South. Men such as Robert E. Lee, especially, who leads the Confederacy. Number three, outside countries definitely gave a respect to the United States to show that we are becoming a world power and that we can easily defeat our neighbors, such as Mexico. And I think the biggest thing you have to highlight is number four. This is huge, okay? All this land, which is great, California and the Mexican Cession region, New Mexico area, we'll look at a map next chapter especially. This land is great, but it means more land that's going to be up for controversy over the slavery question. Would this land become free or slave? And I'm going to tell you right now, one of the biggest must-knows in APUSH is the reason for the Civil War was obviously slavery, but the biggest reason about slavery was, would it expand into the Western territories? Would it be free or slave? And that, to me, is the biggest cause of the Civil War. Lastly, I would highlight this, the Wilmot Proviso. This is in 1846. This is during the early years of the Mexican War, the first year of the war. And this was just a bill introduced by David Wilmot of Pennsylvania during the war. And this is very important because what it said is that any land that was won from Mexican War, such as California, New Mexico, this region, would be free. And this showed that there was going to be some conflict over slavery, and it is going to explode into the end of the 1840s and the 1850s. The slavery question. This proviso was passed in the House, so the House supported ending slavery in the new territories, but not in the Senate. And this is going to show that there's serious conflict about slavery. When the Mexican War is over, the next 12 years, the question is whether we should have slavery in the Western territories.